Hey everybody, welcome back to Winamac Hockey. In today's video, we are giving our free agency grades to the Pacific Division. So let's hop in here. We're going to go alphabetical based upon the cities. So we're going to start with the Anaheim Ducks, who added Strome and Vetrano, both centers, solid centers, and they lost GETZLAF to retirement, MOLANO, and Steele. Jake, you gave him a B. Matt, you also gave them a B. So fellas, what were your thoughts here? Jake, we'll start with you.
So the big loss here for me is Sonny Milano, because you remember that Zegras pass over the net. It was hyped up for months, and then that pass was to Milano, who very clearly is good buddies with Zegras, who's the future of the team, and you let Milano go. It doesn't make sense to me, but I think Strome and Vetrano are both great ads. So I think that's, they had a good offseason. I just think there are aspects that are questionable. It's also questionable to bring in anybody at all if they're going to trade John Gibson, which has been rumored. So we'll see.
Have a ton of cap space as well, so it is kind of intriguing there. Matt, what are your thoughts? You also gave him a B.
I think it was more so just the fact that they were able to bring in more depth for that middle center role that I like this year. They were really relying heavily on Zegras to make a huge jump this year, which he did, and they were relying a lot on GETZLAF to continue giving them support. So they needed somebody to replace him with him leaving. And I think Ryan Strome fits that perfectly. They got him at a good price too, so he's going to give them really good second center role minutes there, and he's going to be good for them. And Vetrano's a very underrated guy as a two-way forward type that can play the wing or can play center. So it's definitely two good signings. It's going to fit well for this team, and I think with some of the guys like Jake said and Sonny Milano leaving, that's going to hurt. But they have a lot of depth as it is on the wing, and I think they'll be okay in the long run.
Yep, and for the same reasons, fellas, I also gave them a B+. So now let's go on to Calgary. They added no one important, and they lost JARNKROK and Johnny Gaudreau, two major names, and Matthew Tkachuk might also be on the move here soon. But as of right now, just these two, notably. Jake, you gave him a C-. Matt, you gave him straight up an F here. Jake, we'll start with you, and then Matt will come over to you next.
All right, well, first off, Cale Jarnkrok was their big trade deadline acquisition. So I don't know why they would just let him go for nothing, especially because I believe he signed with someone after Gaudreau left for Columbus. So once Gaudreau leaves, as a GM, collect yourself, realize there's still a team here, and try to bring back Jarnkrok because he's a great player. He's played a great depth role. He didn't do quite as much as they would have liked in the playoffs, but the way the team's looking now after letting everybody go, playoffs should be their least concern because I don't know if they're going to make it.
Yeah, Matt, I gave him a D-, and you gave him an F here. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was pretty much following that same philosophy. They didn't do anything. All they did was just lose. And it was really weird because this was a team that obviously made a big stride this year, winning the Pacific and moving on and being as good as they were. Yeah, they didn't go as far as they wanted to in the playoffs, but they did have a good run there. And I think it's just a team you thought that they looked to build on, so it was a little puzzling losing a guy like Johnny Gaudreau. It was somebody I know they really wanted to go after him, and they did try to get him, but losing a guy like that, no matter if you try to go after him or not, is a huge loss. And not bringing anybody in, that's just even double. And you think with the amount of salary cap they get back for not signing him, they bring in somebody, but that really wasn't the case. So, yeah, they're really on the back foot here coming into this season, and as the Pacific gets tighter and tighter, that's not a good thing to be.
Yeah, I mean, they made that huge jump. Honestly, no one saw this big of a jump coming for them, and now they're about to take just as big of a jump backwards. So it's just weird situation over there in Calgary. But fellas, let's move on to Edmonton, who on the other hand here had themselves a pretty good free agency. Speaking that Jake gave him an A, I gave him an A-, and Matt, you gave him a B+. So they added Campbell and Picard, and they lost Koskinen, Keith, and Russell. So Jake, you gave him an A here. You obviously liked what they did. How come?
The big acquisition here is Jack Campbell. And if you believe in Jack Campbell, you should be very excited for the Oilers because he's a great goalie. That's where they needed the help at was they had Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen in net. Koskinen got banished to Russia. Mike Smith died. So Campbell was there to step in. And they also got Calvin Pickard, who is, I think, also very old as well, because they need to add a little age. They like when their goalies marinate there in Edmonton. So I think that they addressed the concern that they needed to.
Matt, how about you here?
Yeah, I think they really threw a dart at the perfect spot here in free agency and picking off the one spot that they had issues with, and I think could have been the big reason why they couldn't get over the hump of Colorado in the playoffs, and that was in net. You could see with some of the bad plays that some of their goaltenders were making, they just needed a better guy back there. The defense was playing well enough, but yeah, a guy like Campbell, bringing him in, especially for only $5 million, especially a guy like that, if he's going to be leaving Toronto, you thought it'd be for like some massive contract where he's just going to go get the bag somewhere if he's not going to stay where he's at. But only getting him for $5 million is a really good deal. And also another key underrated thing too is bringing back Evander Kane, which kind of seemed like a done deal. But the fact that they were be able to bring him back after the great postseason he had is huge for this team's depth.
Yeah, it seems like Edmonton definitely won the free agency edition of the Battle of Alberta, because Calgary did not compete in this situation. All right, so next up, fellas, we have LA, who added Fiala and Copley. They lost Brown, MAATTA, ATHANASIOU, and STECHER. Jake, you gave him a B+. I gave him a B+. Matt, you gave them a C. So let's start with Jake. How come you gave him a B+?
All right, so first off, I want to address that the Washington Capitals gave away 3 goalies this offseason: Samsonov and Vanacek, and here to the LA Kings, Penis Copley. So I think that that's strange in its own, but aside from that, LA also added Kevin Fiala. That alone was a great move, but the reason why they weren't in A territory for me is they gave up some key pieces, but they also didn't add as much as we should have expected. I think after they got Fiala early, before free agency even started, we kind of thought, well, who else are they going to go after? They must be going in big, right? No, they got Penis Copley and call it a day.
And Matt, you gave him a C here. How come you gave him a C?
I think it was more they just kind of stayed the same for me, and maybe a little bit of an improvement. Obviously, the Kevin Fiala signing or the trade was big for them, and bringing a guy like that in is going to be huge for the wing. But then at the same point, I highlighted in our LA video that Olli Maatta is a really good defensive defenseman. And the fact that they let him go for the cheap contract that he ended up going to, probably was not a good thing for this team. And they're definitely losing that experience on the back end playing defense for them, because they have a lot of good young offensive defensemen, and obviously they have Drew Doughty, who's an offensive defenseman a little bit on the older end. So they needed that defensive defenseman. I thought that bringing him back would have been a no-brainer. So losing him I thought, hurt a lot. And but yeah, at the same point, I mean, they re-signed some of the guys they needed to re-sign, like Kempe. Bringing him back was huge, and just more depth signings bringing in was good for them. So I think it was just kind of, it's not going to be an F because they didn't say exactly the same, but I kept it a C because they didn't really do anything to like shoot them into like, okay, they're winning the Pacific by a mile territory. And with the Pacific being as open as it is, you think that'd be easier to do. So
yeah, and I think that's absolutely fair. All right, so now let's move on to our next Pacific team, and that is the San Jose Sharks, who added Dell and Lindblom, and they lost Burns, most notably, and STALOK. So Jake, you gave him a B-. Matt, you gave him a C+. Looks like we're all in similar territory here. Jake, so let's start with you.
All right, so they got bonus points for me because they picked up Lindblom. And first off, the Philadelphia Flyers, let's recap what you did this offseason. You ended the Keith Yandle Ironman streak with like 10 games left in the season. Just let the man play out the season. Then, because you didn't embarrass yourself enough, his contract doesn't end. They bought out Oscar Lindblom after exploiting his cancer to make some money. They just get rid of him. So, and he's still a good player. So I don't know why they got rid of Lindblom. But the San Jose Sharks step in. They want to market Lindblom's recovery here themselves. And you know what? I think Lindblom is ready to get on a team and prove the Flyers wrong.
Matt, what are your thoughts here?
I thought the only thing I thought it was a pretty good offseason for him, and getting off that Burns contract, I feel like was huge, and that was something I think a lot of people saw going into the offseason. Is something they really needed to do, either him or getting off of Carlson, and it looked like it was more likely Burns. So that's what ended up happening. And then, like Jake said, Lindbaum, I think, is an underrated winger that they only got for 2.5, so, and a multi-year deal at that. So that's a really good signing to bring in. And I think as a team, they're definitely moving up. They're not anywhere near winning the division territory, but they're definitely in a way better spot than they were last year.
Mm-hmm. All right, fellas. Now let's move on to the Seattle Kraken, who made a splash this free agency so far. They added Burakovsky, Schultz, and Jones. They lost Donato, Rask, Sheahan, my bad, Fleury, and Sprong. So they did lose quite a few guys, but they brought in some notable guys. And I think that's what led to the grades that we gave them here, with Bs all across the board. So Jake, how come you liked Seattle's offseason so far?
So I like the Burakovsky ad, and Justin Schultz was great for Washington. Another questionable move. Why are you getting rid of one of your better defenders? Washington perplexes me, but that's all for Seattle's gain. Adding Martin Jones is also a head scratcher because you have Drieger and Grubby over there. So I don't know where he fits, but I think the other two ads were fantastic. The team overall still confuses me because why didn't you take people like Tarasenko in the expansion draft if you want to compete? But, you know, they got Shane Wright, so apparently that's all they needed to be convinced that they wanted to compete.
Matt, and how about you here? What did you like about Seattle?
Well, I guess I like the Burakovsky signing. It was a weird thing, though, because it seemed like, if anything, they were going to look to add more depth center position, because that was something they really needed to do. And instead, they added to their crowded winger group and made it even more crowded. And not even more of that, like all their wingers, it seems like on the top 6 are making more than $5 million a year now, adding in a guy like Burakovsky. So that's kind of crazy. And then, yeah, obviously, I've been a hater of Martin Jones. I think he's a terrible goaltender. I think anybody who signs him automatically gets worse, even if he's going to be scratched all season. Just him being on the bench, it's just going to be bad. So I think right now this team is in a weird spot. It looks like they're trying to compete. Like Jake said, like, are they trying to compete? Are they not? Hopefully getting some of the guys back from injury and adding in a guy like Burakovsky gives them a little more scoring this year. But I don't know. It's a weird situation for this team, and we'll see what direction they want to go.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, so now let's talk about Vancouver, fellas, a team that's also in just a weird spot, really. And this free agency didn't make things any clearer. They added Mikheyev, Lazar, and Delia, and they lost HALAK. And I know some Vancouver fans probably are okay with losing HALAK, but they didn't really add anybody. So across the board, we have Jake. You gave him a C-, I gave him a C-, and Matt gave him a D. So Jake, let's start with you, and then Matt will pan over to you next.
So let's start with HALAK. HALAK was lights out, fantastic, stood on his head every night in Boston. He comes to Vancouver, and he looks old, he looks slow, he looks like he doesn't know what goaltending is, and I blame Vancouver for that. A goalie doesn't just go from being great to being terrible in a season. It just doesn't happen. I don't think Vancouver has the right system in place. I don't think they're playing their young players right because they're not developing like they should. I see so many problems with Vancouver, and there's so much talent there. You've got Petey and you've got Brock Besser. They're so good, and they deserve better than what Vancouver is giving them. I don't remember where HALAK went, but I think he's going to better pastures. Ilya Mikheyev makes no sense to me. Then Curtis Lazar is obviously a depth piece, so not as important. I will say that Colin Delia is an okay replacement for HALAK, who obviously didn't fit. So I know you guys got to see him a lot. I think he played well in his time in Chicago. He didn't really get a lot of chances, but I don't think they made bad additions. I just don't think they're making the right additions.
Matt, and how about your thoughts here?
Colin Delia is terrible. I think if you saw anything, the last game of the season in Chicago should tell you anything you need to know. He gave up 3 goals in like a minute. It seemed to blow that game. So, but anyway, moving on from that, I think Mikheyev was one of the worst contracts in the entire free agency period. The fact that he's getting paid $500K less than Evander Kane is horrible. This guy, nowhere near. He had 21 goals last year, which is okay, but he's also a depth winger who's 27 years old. They're acting like he's some prospect with a lot of upside. He's 27 years old. So, like, it's not like he's just getting into the prime of his career. And they're throwing him in. He's already projecting a lot of projections to be a second or third pair winger. So you paid $4.5, almost $5 million for a guy who's going to be playing second to third line minutes. That just doesn't make sense to me. It's a waste of salary cap to me. And it honestly just spells a lot of issues with this roster and this GM. I don't know what he's doing. I thought he was going to be an upgrade over Benning, but it doesn't look like it at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely a head scratcher for sure. But let's move on to the next team here, and that is Vegas. All across the board, fellas, we gave them an F because they added future considerations and they lost Pacioretty and JANMARK. Obviously, their cap has been an issue, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. But my goodness gracious, I've never seen a team fall apart so quickly. So, Jake, let's start with you here. What are your thoughts on their offseason?
So just like Cale Yarncroc, Mattias Janmark was also a trade deadline acquisition that actually played really well for Vegas, and he's gone as well. He would have been cheap. I don't remember who he signed with, but it wasn't Vegas, which is a huge loss for them, especially since they got back no one. Their habit of cycling players like it's free is catching up with them because it's not free. The salary cap takes no prisoners, and Vegas is the latest victim.
Matt, some of the thoughts here?
Yeah, I think even so with a guy like Matt Pacioretty, which, yeah, he was hurt for a lot of the year, but the dude had 37 points in 39 games with him. So in the games that he played, he was really good. So the fact that they just kind of ship him off for nothing. And yeah, his contract's huge. And yeah, he's 33 years old. But I mean, he did have a good portion of the season where he was healthy. So I don't really get it. He was a guy who was a top pair guy for him, and you'd think you'd get something back for him, even if he's a guy coming off injury. But I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And it's kind of just, I agree with Jake. It's just, they've had to shed cap so much because they keep giving monster contracts out left and right. That's just screwing over the depth of this roster. And sooner or later, they're going to be a team like Toronto. They're going to have like 3 dudes making $10 million a year on the top line. Meanwhile, everybody else is making $800K because they can't afford to pay anybody decent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a team that's going to be interesting to see move forward and who they get rid of and what kind of people they bring in because they can't afford anything at this point. So, fellas, those are our free agency grades. Are there any other thoughts before we wrap up this video? All right, sounds great. For those of you that are still watching, let us know in the comments below what you think of our grades and where would you grade some of these teams. And we'll see you next time on Winnemac Hockey.